Welcome to the Opinion Show. Today we're going to be talking about Ray Rice, formerly of the Baltimore Ravens, and the issue of domestic violence more generally, but also in the NFL. Is this something that the NFL simply does not take very seriously? Mark Namick of the Northeast Ohio Media Group posted a column just a few moments ago talking about Jim Brown's somewhat checkered history and the many allegations that have dogged him about violence against women. In most cases dismissed, or in one case he was found not guilty by a jury, and yet he's now the special advisor to the Browns. So is this something that the NFL needs to take more seriously? Is this something that as a society we need to pay more attention to, because it is difficult to prosecute? We had a case in Amanda Harnosh, who's standing behind the camera today, so you cannot see her, but she just posted something about the Cleveland woman who started the hashtag Why I Stayed. And that is a big, issue here of women, though domestic violence can be against men or women, but women who stay for reasons of love or reasons of, power. Sometimes violence against women is just about power, or violence against men in a domestic situation. Anyway, I'm Elizabeth Sullivan. I am the opinion director for the Northeast Ohio Media Group. I'm joined by other members of the editorial board, Kevin O'Brien, our noted columnist, as well as the deputy editorial page editor of The Plain Dealer, and editorial writers Pete Krouse, Chris Evans, and Sharon Broussard. Pete, I'm going to start with you because you wrote our editorial about this for your perspective, as well as you follow the NFL pretty closely.
It was a situation that arose here on Monday, as we all know, with the release of this TMZ Sports video that showed Ray Rice decking his then fiancee with a rather vicious left hook. Previously, the only video that the NFL and the law enforcement, I shouldn't say law enforcement, the NFL claims the only video they had to go on was the one that showed Ray Rice dragging his fiancee out of the elevator like a rolled up carpet, which probably should have been enough to have caused the NFL to mete out more substantial punishment when it did, but nonetheless it didn't. Anyway, this whole incident has raised this larger issue, which you mentioned, of domestic violence, not just in the NFL, but in society in general. And you ask, is it more prevalent in the NFL? Well, obviously it's a serious problem outside the NFL and inside the NFL, but it may well be proportionately more of a problem in the NFL for the simple fact that you're nurturing very aggressive, violent, at least controlled violence in these athletes, and they're not exactly taught to be sensitive, at least not on the job. So maybe there is a larger issue there that the NFL does need to address much more seriously than it apparently has been.
And we should also just mention in the connection with Ray Rice that he was charged with a third-degree felony by a grand jury that apparently did view this tape that the rest of us didn't see till Monday, but that he was then diverted into a first offender diversion program, possibly because his now wife, who was then his fiancée, did not want to testify, possibly because of his celebrity or possibly because this was just appropriate. But I think that this is something, Chris, I know you followed the issue of domestic violence and how prevalent it really is, and its many manifestations, and it's not just within the NFL at all.
No, but I think the Ray Price case serves as a great example. Here is, first of all, both of them were arrested the night of the incident and charged with assault. Janae was subsequently let go, and Ray Price was indicted on this third-degree felony. At that point, he is not eligible for a diversion program. Diversion programs are for people with low-level nonviolent felonies. And yet, you have the judge, who is male, but the prosecutor, who is a woman, and the woman who is the head of the diversion program, going along with this. I mean, he should never have been put in that program.
But now you're basing it on Ohio law. I mean, could New
I'm
Jersey
basing
law?
it on common sense.
Well, common sense, sure, but
aggravated assault is
No, I would agree with
It's a
you.
serious-
I would agree with you, but if maybe New Jersey law does allow, this was a third-degree felony, maybe they did allow that as something that was eligible for
I doubt it.
diversion.
I doubt
Well, I
Well,
doubt
in
it too, but we
this-
just don't know.
In this case, you had a judge and the prosecutor's office approving it, so one has to assume that it is allowed because they allowed it.
Right.
But whether it's appropriate, I think maybe is the question.
Yes.
Sharon, what do you think about this situation?
Oh, I think that it just kind of reveals the kind of things that we as society don't want to look at. I mean, the fact that, at the press conference, side by side, she apologized for what happened. He never looked at her once, and he did not apologize, either at the very beginning where he had a string of coaches and counselors and everybody, to the very end. So it kind of raises questions about, how much responsibility he's still taking for this, whether or not they're both in denial. I understand that the Ravens had applauded him early on. After the incident, he got a standing ovation from fans. There were hashtags about how great and wonderful he was, and it's only until people saw the TMZ video, which in a way, you had to conjecture that if you're dragging somebody out of an elevator and they did not faint, and there's some kind of assault, that then something really wicked and evil happened there. But
Yeah.
I think our eyes weren't opened until we actually saw that hook, and it kind of, I think, says a lot about how we kind of don't want to look at these issues full
Right.
on.
I
But shouldn't
think
the
you're right.
the NFL should have sought out that video and
Yes.
should have had that,
Yes.
should have had that. I mean,
But
obviously
they,
he didn't blow
they
in her ear.
definitely should.
But
You know what I
even,
mean?
but even without that video, I mean, when you are carrying your unconscious fiance, sort of halfway out of the elevator into a hotel,
And kicking her legs,
and kicking her
close.
legs, and then dropping her like a bag of garbage, I really think a 2-day suspension is absurd. I mean, I think the evidence was clear at that point that something terrible had happened inside that elevator, and a more severe punishment should have been.
So
handed out.
they gave him a 2-game suspension initially. They claimed they did not see the more graphic tape until Monday when the rest of the world saw it. Whether that's the front office, whether others within the NFL saw it or not, that was unclear. But then when that video came out Monday, not only did the Ravens terminate his contract, but the NFL then suspended him indefinitely. So.
Well, Goodell
And
spoke this
Goodell-
morning.
Oh,
He-
okay.
It was either last night or this morning with CBS. And he said that they asked for everything, but they were not given it, that the law enforcement didn't feel like they could release it. And maybe there's some validity to that. Certainly I would think, though, that Rice's attorney had it, and they could have asked Rice's attorney for the video. Goodell was not asked that question in the interview, so he didn't have to answer that. But certainly you would have thought that they should have been a little more aggressive.
And I think that Sharon's point, though, is well taken, that you have to, I mean, the inference was that he knocked her out.
Oh, right.
So violently, so why do you actually have to see the videotape
Right.
to know that? In fact, Goodell did acknowledge that the 2-game suspension was
Right.
too weak of a response, and the NFL has changed its policy to a kind of 2-tier, first time, second time.
But I think what happened with the videotape and what didn't happen with it is pretty instructive here. The difference between two organizations, TMZ wanted it, the NFL didn't.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That's a good
I
point.
think that's what it comes down
Yeah.
to, because if TMZ can get it, are you telling me that a body with the clout that the NFL has in this nation and the monetary power and standing that it has couldn't have gotten a hold of the video?
I agree,
I
Kevin.
believe they asked. I believe.
Yeah, right.
But
I don't
did
believe
not
they asked very hard.
aggressively,
I don't think they
right, go
pressed
after
him,
it.
and it's, like I say, it's unclear whether they asked Rice's attorney, and if Rice's attorney, and this has been discussed on radio shows and so forth, if Rice's attorney said, well, we're not going to turn that over, then Goodell's action at that point was simple. It says, okay, well, Mr. Rice won't be playing in the NFL.
Right.
Until we see it
I
and see
do
the whole story.
I do think, though, this underscores a bigger issue with domestic violence, which is that most of it is invisible to the public.
Yes.
Yep.
That this is why it's so prevalent, and yet we really don't even have a good grasp of how prevalent it is. Those cases that come to the attention of law enforcement because somebody gets tossed over a balcony or beaten up in their car or whatever,
Good point.
in those cases, even when you have, the signs of assault on those women, mostly, often those women, because of this tendency of fear or power control or whatever things are going on within a relationship, cause them to decline to testify, and then there's not sufficient evidence. Now, in this case, you have a video,
But I think,
it makes you
Betsy,
wonder,
you mentioned.
it makes you wonder whether or not it's even invisible to the couple themselves, the way they circle
Right.
the wagon.
That's what I was
Janae
gonna say.
just put out
Well, she takes
a notice saying,
responsibility.
it's my family, please leave us alone, this is
Right.
all the media's fault, as though maybe the two of them aren't even looking at this as,
Well, to a certain
major
extent, though,
issue.
domestic violence has become entertainment in this.
What do you mean?
Well, you look at all these shows on TV, cops and this and that, and they go in there and they're at the trailer park or whatever, and they're interviewing the woman, and she'll say something. Well, he hit me, and I mean, it's almost like we've been somewhat desensitized to some of this, and you look at and just the TV shows in general. I mean, everything that we do is so violent in its nature anymore that I think we do somewhat desensitize ourselves to these kinds of things when they happen in real life. I'd like
oh, wait
to-
a minute,
Wait,
when
wait,
people
wait.
saw that video,
People
all
saw
of
that
a sudden.
video, they responded, and
All of
I
a
think-
sudden,
I
yeah.
think-
Yeah,
I
it was Ray Rice too. If that would have been, if that would have been
Joe
just
Blow.
anybody coming out of an elevator,
Yes.
nobody
Might have been a
except
meme by
for
now,
true
a
advocates,
joke.
except for true advocates, nobody would have said a thing.
That
I
is a good-
disagree. I don't think
That
that's,
could be
I
a
don't,
good point.
do not think that's true. I think if you drag an unconscious woman out of an elevator and drop her in the lobby of a hotel, there are going to be witnesses, and there is going to be action. I don't think people would walk away from that. But Betsy mentioned earlier the hashtag Why I Stayed that Amanda did the post on. That created another hashtag, which was called Why I Left.
Right.
And what I thought, one of the positive things that have come out of this horrible beating is that there is a conversation going on nationally now where women, it's mostly women, are talking about why they stayed, that they thought that it was their fault, that they loved them. If they loved them more, they could stay. And then there's the other side of it, why I left, when they finally realized that it's not going to stop.
Yeah, but we need to have that conversation with men too. On our local NPR station, and he had a caller who said, well, hey, I didn't think this was right for him to hit her, but if she had come up, with her fist up, ready in a fighting stance, I think he should have decked her. And I was like, seriously?
Yeah, you gotta think this guy-
apparently there are still people out there who
Yeah,
still
but I
don't
mean, you
get
gotta-
it.
you gotta
I
think-
also think that
Shocking.
when you have violence in a household, that it is as prevalent as this appears to be, that you're essentially instructing the next generation this is an
Yes.
appropriate way to
And they
to
do have a
handle
daughter. They
issues
have
of
a
stress. And that has actually been shown, that this can be a generational issue. So I do think it is very important, in fact, that this be part of conversations in schools, that this be part of conversations in churches, synagogues, temples, that this is something that law enforcement needs to actually consider, even if the spouse or the partner doesn't want to participate in the prosecution. If they have sufficient evidence, go ahead and
Absolutely.
prosecute.
But-
And that brings us to the judge, our friend Lance Mason, where you have this judge driving along in Shaker Heights, pounding his wife's head against
Allegedly.
allegedly pounding his wife's head against. But anyway,
Yeah, well, it kind of raises the question to me about prevention. I think the caller of that show kind of presumed, well, here they are together and they're both kind of, upset with each other and both kind of doing this kind of, hitting each other. So, it should go into a full-blown fight. But come on, he could have taken the next elevator. He's rich enough, he could have rented another hotel room. I mean, there are all kinds of ways of saying, like, okay, we're both pissed off tonight. Everybody knows that happens from time to time, and we need to separate. We don't need to be together, so that way this can turn into
That's
something
absolutely
ugly. And there was
right.
no, I guess there are very few skills around that need to be taught. Get it out of the
And-
situation.
And what you said
If you
earlier
can,
too,
if
about
you can.
recognizing that there's a problem.
Yes.
That's pretty critical to solving the problem.
Right.
Kevin, you've been strangely silent from us.
Well, I mean, there's nothing to disagree with in most of what's been said here, and I think your point is the one most worth emphasizing. It's how people are raised, it's how they're brought up, it's how they're enculturated. These things do travel from generation to generation, and if you're going to, I don't think you ever stop it, honestly. I'm pessimistic on that. But I think it's a family-based problem that has to be solved within the family, and it's very hard to do that because getting inside and being an outsider who can actually do something constructive is extremely difficult.
Though I think this, before we leave this, we're a little over time, that is why the NFL's sort of shrug of the shoulders. The Browns' response to Mark Namath's column today was, Jim Brown is a great mentor to folks. Now, admittedly, he's never been convicted of any violence, all been accusation, but, I think that when the role models for our kids, like, our football superstars, if they cannot.
We cannot lay this on role models, celebrity role models.
All right.
That's part of the problem is this thing doesn't come to a head until it happens to a celebrity. Until we see this as a problem affecting
That's not-
everybody,
but
and
That's
we
not
treat it
what I
that way.
meant. What I meant was the NFL's failure to take it seriously is what says to young people that this is okay. That this
Right,
is the-
and
this is what we want.
I think the NFL was kind of dragged into coming to that conclusion, and hopefully they've come to that conclusion. And hopefully they will take it very seriously, and hopefully this will improve for everybody.
Yeah, but
So I think we have to leave it there, even though we all have strong feelings about this. We'd like to hear your strong feelings about this. Where do you think this issue has its most susceptible point for curing? Are you yourself one of those women who's considering, should I stay, should I leave, or a man in an abusive relationship? How do you think about this? We'd like to hear your comments. Please post them. Thank you for joining us.